Caufield. Controlling. Hands it to Suzuki. Suzuki breaks to the net. Circles, wrap around. He scores. Montreal wins it.
With 24 Stanley Cup championships, the Montreal Canadiens are one of the most storied franchises in the world. But judging by the head coaches over the past 20 years, it's also fair to say it was one of the most chaotic ones around.
You know what? I wish from all my players that night, during the evening, they eat their chocolate cookies and drink a glass of milk. I wish.
Welcome to the lineup. Today we look at how the Habs managed to turn around their franchise after decades of misdirection. The Montreal Canadiens boast two of the greatest dynasties of all time. The first led by Maurice Richard in the 1950s, and the second one in the late 1970s, led by Guy Lafleur, Larry Robinson, Ken Dryden, and many others. With the rise of the New York Islanders and the Edmonton Oilers in the early 1980s, it wasn't until 1985-86 when a rookie coach named Jean Perron led rookies Patrick Roy and Claude Lemieux, a cast of reliable veterans in Bobby Smith, Mats Naslund, and up-and-comers Peter Svoboda, Chris Chelios, and the rest to a 23rd Stanley Cup. The Habs remained competitive, with Pat Burns coaching a dominant team to the Stanley Cup Finals in 1989, only to lose to Lanny McDonald and Mike Vernon. A few years later, in 1993, coach Jacques Demers led the Habs to their 24th Cup, before a period of 3 decades where the Habs failed to win another Cup. The hiring of Mario Tremblay and Régent Houle as coach and GM in 1995 started off with a bang, but then slid into chaos. What followed then were a series of baffling trades.
A rare night indeed at the Forum in Montreal. Patrick Roy just went over and said something to Corey, and I'm not so sure what it was, but he went right to him.
First, beloved netminder Patrick Roy was shipped to Colorado, and Mark Recchi was acquired from the Philadelphia Flyers in exchange for Eric Desjardins, Gilbert Dion, and Jean Leclerc. Tremblay was relieved of his duties. Subsequent coaches Alain Vigneault, Michel Terrier, and Claude Julien brought some order, but no results. The 1990s also saw the Habs leave the storied Montreal Forum, taking their famed hot dogs but leaving the ghosts behind, relocating to their new amphitheater, then known as Molson Center, but left fans hungry for glory and victory. On January 2, 2001, American George Gillette bought an 80% interest in the Montreal Canadiens and their home arena for $185 million. His tenure elevated the organization by developing Gillette Entertainment Group, which made the venue the second most busy arena after Madison Square Garden in Manhattan. But that period was equally fruitless, and by decade's end, Gillette cashed out, selling the business to Jeff Molson and his consortium of investors in 2009. Fans were understandably elated with the potential of a Molson scion grabbing the bull by the horns.
The rebuild. Jeff Molson. Okay, perfect.
Hoping he could restore the club's once glory. But that wasn't meant to be, at least not at first. Molson replaced President Pierre Boivin. He never assumed the official role of head of hockey operations per se, but you got a sense that he was the de facto GM or head of hockey affairs. After a decade of leaning in as owner, barring a miracle 2021 run all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals,
the Stanley Cup is in the building. You know the Canadiens are going to have to weather a storm tonight.
The 2010s decade was one more of mediocrity. While the Roy trade will go down as one of the worst in franchise and league history, the Habs seemed intent to top it off firstly by moving promising defenseman Ryan McDonagh in a trade to the New York Rangers, where the Habs inherited one of the most tricky contracts in the league, that of Scott Gomez. Meanwhile, McDonagh eventually moved to the Tampa Bay Lightning, where he'd win 2 cups. Speaking of Tampa Bay, That's where another Habs prospect ended up after the Jonathan Drouin trade in 2017, making it a double gut punch as he too became a Stanley Cup champion with the Lightning.
Yeah, Shuggy! Right there, boys! Shuggy Fisher, baby!
Then, something changed. To his credit, Molson realized that he needed to surround himself with the right talent. On January 18th, 2022, Kent Hughes was named as the club's 18th general manager, while former Rangers and Bruins executive Jeff Gorton was brought in as VP of Hockey Operations. But it wasn't really until the Habs brought in retired Hall of Famer Martin St. Louis as their 32nd coach in June 2022 that things really pivoted. After the Therrien-Julien revolving door, which saw both men coach in 2000 to 2006, and again from 2012 to 2021, Hughes and Gorton, who crossed paths with St. Louis in New York, recruited the Laval native who notched over 100 goals at the collegiate level in 120 games at the University of Vermont. St. Louis went undrafted, signing with the Calgary Flames before he found his calling in Tampa, playing alongside Vincent Lecavalier, leading the Bolts to a Stanley Cup championship in 2004, eliminating the Habs in the process. During his Hall of Fame career, St. Louis won the Art Ross and Hart in 2004, before winning the Art Ross again later on, and concluding his career as a Ranger in Manhattan.
When I say that, you say Donna!
Given Montreal's bilingual nature, finding a credible coach the media, fan base, and players could entrust was no small order. Hence the Therrien-Julien pattern. A fair and unfair knock at Molson was that he had done a great job developing Le Groupe CH, with the Osheaga Festival, acquisition of the Just for Laughs Festival, and the development of many Canadiens branded real estate properties, while the product on the ice suffered. However, slowly but surely, the culture was changing.
Suzuki, one more chance. Caufield scores! Oh my stars, Cole Caufield ties it!
This had already started, with lawyer France Marguerite Bélanger, now president of the sports and entertainment group within Le Groupe CH. Trailblazing broadcaster Chantal Machabé was brought in to run corporate communications, who, seemingly overnight, turned the Habs from an aloof, frosty corporate shell into a beloved leader in the community. A decade ago, players scoffed at the specter of signing in Montreal as a free agent. High taxes, cold winters, enrolling their kids in French schools, potholes, etc. But today, those negatives are all parts of the Montreal mysticism. During the 2024-25 season, Toronto-born Jake Evans had the chance to play out his final year of his contract before signing for bigger dollars elsewhere. Granted, Montreal's cost of living makes the city more affordable than other markets, but Evans took less money to stay in Montreal. Not surprisingly, given how traded-for sharpshooter Patrik Laine spoke highly of the team dynamics here after his stints in Winnipeg and Columbus.
The hat-trick goal, all power play markers for Patrik Laine.
As a former agent himself, Kent Hughes has delivered Jedi-level negotiations by getting young stars like Captain Nick Suzuki, sniper Cole Caufield, and 2022 #1 overall draft pick Yuri Slafkovsky to sign fair deals that will prove bargains over time. Earlier this year, when President Donald Trump's tariffs and tough talk drove a wedge between fans north and south of the border, the American-born Caufield's response to fans booing the Star-Spangled Banner showed so much poise and maturity that you could start to understand why this club was gelling the way it was. If that nucleus weren't enough, the Habs reversed a draft pattern that saw them for years picking unfruitful talent early on to identify elite talent both atop the selection order and later on. Lane Hutson was selected 62nd overall.
Here comes Hutson. Lane Hutson scores! Hutson! What a shot!
The Habs teams that won in 1986 and 1993 did so despite the odds. They were talented players at different stages of their career who parlayed their skills and confidence into magical runs.
Et la première étoile, the first star, Lane Hutson!
This edition of the team is drafted and built differently, but in so many ways, may be the edition with the strongest foundation yet. And given Les Glorieux's history, that's saying a lot.
The Montreal Canadiens are proud to select Ivan Demidov.